Hello everybody, I'm Jo and I'm the lead nurse for dementia at Imperial. Imperial College, I won't do the whole title because it's very long and I get it wrong, is a lot of big hospitals in West London that are sort of married together in a big happy trust. And we have lots of specialist areas. We have a big renal unit, we have a major trauma unit, we have hyperacute stroke, and lots of general wards as well, just, sort of general wards where all the local community come in. And we've been involved in DRTS units since 2014. And I've realised, looking at this, that the slide is slightly wrong, so really sorry, Graham, because we actually now are currently using 6 large units and I think probably 8 tablets, because another ward has bought them. And is really enjoying them. And we use them in a variety of different places, and what I'm going to talk about today is just some of the applications that have been really helpful to us, and again using a couple of case histories which I think illustrate how useful it's been. So we use them in acute admissions, and where we as with many big acutes, we have a lot of people sort of funneling into acute medical admissions wards, and they're very busy and they're very high turnover, and you have a real mixture of patients. And we're finding them increasingly useful in that environment, just to provide distraction, a little bit of comfort actually for patients. Also in acute medicine and in stroke, we've been working with our hemodialysis unit. We have loads of satellite hemodialysis units, but we have a big central one which takes all the dialysis patients who are problematic for the regional units. And we've been doing quite a lot of work with them, which I'll talk about. And we've started using it more post-operatively, and the place that's just bought the 2 units is actually a post-operative rehab ward. And they're finding it very useful in that environment. So it's sort of spreading across a range of environments, and I know that's obviously been spoken about this morning. But I think it does make it interesting because you can apply it to so many different areas. And the ways in which we use the units at the moment is we use them individually, and particularly when patients are in side rooms and they're feeling isolated and alone. We use them in groups. We don't use them enough in groups. We're still not too familiar with the whole, getting people together concept in our trust, I think. But we are getting better, and I'll show you a way in which we're trying to sort of get people to think about, being with patients in larger groups. We use it for delirious patients quite a lot, and that's been very effective in hemodialysis and also as a teaching tool. And we've been working with Graham, the company, developing teaching materials, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this is one of our completely chaotic tea parties, and I feel slightly embarrassed putting this slide up after all those marvellous pictures of beautiful airport-like wards and things. And this is what it looks like in central London. Sorry. We've been trying to encourage nutrition and hydration on our medicine for the elderly wards by having tea parties. It isn't just an excuse for me to eat a lot of cake, although that, it's quite a nice sort of side thing going on. And we use the DRTS software when we're doing the tea parties, and we use it for music, but we also use it for group activities like quizzes and the higher and lower game, which everybody loves. And just to kind of create an atmosphere, and it's been really fantastic. It's one of those things where everybody just keeps saying, can we have the big telly thing back? And you're like, it's not a big telly thing. But this was an example of just a very chaotic sort of Christmas party right in the middle of the ward, where we had the music on. And after this, people actually started getting up and trying to dance, which, as you can imagine, in that space was really interesting. Wasn't an entirely successful attempt. And I wanted to show you another instance where we used it, and this was another tea party at one of our other sites, Hammersmith Hospital. And what was interesting here was that we were in a slightly more public area, and we brought the patients out from the ward with some of the nurses, and these young lads were visiting their granny. And of course they saw the tech and they thought this was obviously much more interesting than visiting Granny. Granny was there actually, I have to say. And so they started fiddling with it, and they were like, oh, can we do the quiz? Can we do it? And all this, and we were like, well, okay. And we ended up with them spending about 2 hours joining everybody with this tea party. And it got bigger and bigger, and more people started joining it. And we just ended up with a really fantastic afternoon. And in the midst of this, it was a mixture of younger people, visitors, patients on the ward, people with dementia. It was just a mixture of all sorts of people. And we were all doing this quiz, getting very competitive, it has to be said. But it just ended up being a fantastic mixture of people, and it kind of was really sort of cross-generational. And I think that's one of the things that the the DRTS units do, is actually sort of cross that generational thing, because they're interesting for younger people and you can fiddle with them and you can sort of sell them to your younger members of staff who are more interested in sort of tech stuff. So it was just a really sweet afternoon. I'll talk a little bit about this patient, Johnny, who does still make me laugh when I think about it, because he was quite wicked. But he had dementia. He had a severe delirium, and I think he'd been wanting to go out for a fag, and he jumped out the window of his nursing home, but unfortunately he was on the second floor, and so he broke both his ankles. And he was very agitated and very aggressive on the ward, constantly shouting, constantly trying to get out of bed. He had a very limited attention span and just got absolutely furious if you tried to sort of engage him in anything, just got very cross about everything. And we'd been told he liked football, and so we tried all this sort of stuff around football, and that just made him cross. It was probably quite tactless considering he had broken ankles, but looking back. But we bought the DRTS unit, and it was sort of, we'll see if there's anything. And one of my colleagues started sort of trawling through it, and we thought we'd try a bit of music. So we tried a bit of music, didn't like it, tried a bit more, swore at us. And then we got on to Irish music, and he was an Irish chap. And we got on to Irish music, and suddenly it was a bit like they were talking, you were talking about the light being switched on. And all of a sudden we found out that, he actually had a major sort of involvement with Irish music all the way through his sort of younger life. And he suddenly started talking, started singing along with it. And it got to the point where you couldn't turn it off, because when you turned it off, he got really annoyed and started shouting again. So we were on one of these very little wards, and we had Irish music on the DRTS unit playing for about 2 weeks. And the patients actually were quite glad of it, because it actually sort of made the environment nicer than it had been when it wasn't playing. And he'd be singing along with it, and we got through the entire catalogue of Irish songs on there. But he was calm when he was listening to that music, and he could actually do things. And the staff started putting it on when they needed, for example, to deliver personal care. So they'd bring it in, and they'd have it in the sort of room. Or in the bay, and they'd actually start, they were actually then able to wash him and engage with him and talk to him, and he'd respond, which was really interesting. The interesting thing about it was also, though, that when we tried on one occasion to use a CD player with him, and it didn't work, and what we found was he needed to be watching the turntable, and the turntable was part of it. The fact that there was a sort of involvement with the visual, the visual stimulation as well, of watching this turntable and sort of, engaging him in the music. And when he could see it, he really responded very well. And inevitably, sadly, the family wanted to take it with them when he left, but we couldn't give it to them because it was a bit expensive. But it's an interesting example of actually, just a simple thing that we learnt about him through the unit. And another case of that, which is not dissimilar, but I'm making a point because I've nagged Graham for probably 5.5 years to put films on the DRTS unit, and they're on there now. And the afternoon that we got the thing upgraded and we had the films put on it, we were called to see a patient in a side room. And this poor man had dementia for about 5 years, Carlos, and everybody described him, even his neighbours, as difficult and unpleasant, just won't speak to you. And they were really struggling with trying to, deliver care for him, because he didn't want to do anything, didn't want to sort of talk to anybody. And he again was in a side room. And we took up the unit thinking we're going to inflict films on this man because we've got films now. So, whether he likes it or he's getting films. Of course it wasn't like that, but how when you're really excited about something. So we tried it, and we said to him, would it be, should we put a film on to see what he'd do? And again, it was the same, a little bit like Johnny, where we discovered that he loved films and he loved musical theatre. Turned out he'd been a theatre producer, and he'd been quite a sort of, quite a major sort of impresario in his time. And he was really, really interested in theatre, in film, in acting. And so having these on there was absolutely fantastic. And he worked his way pretty much, I think, through the entire catalogue during his admission. Again, we couldn't get it back, and because we've only got a few, kept going up and sort of trying to get it, but we had to leave it there. So it was literally just a little thing about saying that the films are great, love them. And they work really well with some people when you want to sort of give somebody a 2 or 2.5 hour sort of time when they can really absorb themselves. And we're finding those very effective. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Ouchie, our haemodialysis unit. And there are unique challenges in this unit. I mean, I was quite shocked when I went there and I saw quite how much machinery there was and how much activity and the noise, and it just feels like a really sort of acute environment. And again, there are those issues with infection control, and they're particularly on infection control. And when we first went to see them, we said, oh, what about activities? Oh, no, can't have that. And what about food? No, can't have that. And what about this? No, can't have that. Until we took them one of the DRTS units, and then they were like, we might be able to have that. But you've got to have something that's on wheels, that's move-awayable when you've got really unstable patients that you suddenly need to sort of change, to sort of actually sort of resuscitate. They've also got a lot of younger patients with learning disabilities, some of whom have now developed dementia. Their patients are often visually impaired, which is a real issue when you're trying to sort of find something for them to do. And they've, the unit's quite modern, and they have little tiny tellies quite high up, which of course no one can see very easily, and so that's a problem because they're just, too far away. And they have a large number of patients at the moment with cognitive impairment. I mean, on some days, I think it's 70% of their patients have cognitive impairments on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. And they don't like being dialysed, and so they're fighting the dialysis and they're trying to get off it, and they're being very agitated, and the staff are becoming really desperate for a solution. And so we found the advantage of using the DRTS in that setting is that they like the tech, because they're quite techie nurses and techie staff. And again, so it appealed to them, and they were able to sort of engage with it really quickly because they're very used to dealing with that sort of thing. We had one patient, Salim, who is 22, and he has learning disabilities, and he has also got dementia. And in a very difficult situation, and they were really struggling with him. He hated coming and having the dialysis, and he was wanting to be turned off after about 2 minutes, and they were struggling, and they had a carer with him, and it was still really difficult. And we managed to scrounge a long-term loan of a tablet off Graham, and thought we'd try it with him. And we thought because he was younger, it might not work very well, and we sort of just see what he thought of it. And he absolutely loves it, and it actually, he now quite looks forward to coming in because he gets his tablet when he comes in, and it's become known as Salim's machine now, and sits in the matron's office and comes out when he comes in, and he has all his things on it, and he remembers things. And even though the design wasn't necessarily for younger people, he actually really loves it. He loves the games. He loves doing the sort of, because things are quite sort of slightly slower on it, he can follow them and things like that, and he absolutely loves it, and he's still using it. And that was about a year ago, and he's still using it every time he comes in. So that's been a very positive thing. We've also found the patients really like the activities. Some of the really short-term activities work well, where they get 5 minutes where they can literally just do something really quickly and then have a little bit of a sleep, and the staff can go off and do something else. And slowly but surely they're starting to incorporate it into what they do. It's taken a long time because everybody was too busy and there was too much going on. But they're really starting to see the advantages now. And pretty much every time we go there now, they've got it on and they're using it with somebody. And it's taken a long time for it to sort of embed, but it is now, I think. And what we did was we measured their burnout rates because they were a very, very stressed group of staff. And we used the Maslach burnout inventory, which, is a bit of an old thing, but it's kind of interesting. And they had very, very high rates of burnout when we sort of before we started. And when we went back and measured it about a year later, it's much improved. They feel they can actually do something now. They feel they've got, they can actually do something which is going to affect the situation. So that's really positive. And onward and upward, we've just got to persuade them to get more now. So finally, as a teaching tool, and we've been working on what we can put on the units, which would actually just be useful to people everywhere. So one of the things we found is hospital staff, and I know it's very much a lot of what's been talked about this morning. Hospital staff often don't really know how to start doing things. They don't really know what they're supposed to be being expected to do when we talk about things. And I think in a lot of hospitals where there's very little resource, you give them something, you say, off you go and do that. And people think, don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so what we decided was to write a guide around actually sort of useful guide to sort of things you can do for people with dementia in hospital. And as part of the guide, we actually have a section on activity at the end of each thing. So in the end of the delirium section, there's sort of useful activities for delirious people and things you maybe need to think about. And hopefully that's going on the unit in about a month. Yes. About a month. So those will be on the units and people can just access it and print bits off or just look at bits that are useful to them. We also made an instructional film on hand massage for the unit, which again hopefully will be going on in about a month, and I'll show you a clip of that. And we use a huge amount of hand massage with our patients just as a really nice thing to do, as something we can get carers to do, we can get volunteers to do, but also to calm people down and to have a bit of sort of affirming touch and things like that. So we're really keen to spread that message. And I know before I learned how to do it, I always used to be really uncertain about doing that sort of thing because you think, oh, I don't know how to do it, I'm not trained. And so the idea of this was to have something you could just copy. You can turn the volume down, you can just copy what she does, and it's really simple. And it provides a really nice little hand massage. So I'll show you that as well. So the subjects covered in the guide are quite extensive, as you can see here. I'm not going to read down them because you'll probably all die of boredom. But it's in a standard format, and you get a body of information. Then you get what to consider when you're doing activities and some references at the end for those of anybody who's interested in that sort of thing. And we cover most of the sort of big issues that come up in hospitals. And this is a very bad slide, I do apologise, but this is an example of sort of what sort of things on it. And we've divided activities up into physical activity, passive and relaxing activity, cognitively stimulating activity, reminiscence and group and social. And just making people think of things that would be relevant in that situation. For example, you might, if you've got someone with a hypoactive delirium where they're very sleepy, you might not want to be doing hand massage because, you're just going to knock them out for another few hours. Might not be the ideal. Or you might want to, with delirious patients, you might want to be using sort of the clips because they're very short, and if you've got inattention, it just works very well in that situation. So kind of using some of the things that we've picked up along the way just to help, other people sort of think about it and to give them pointers to move forward. And so that hopefully will be available quite soon. So in summary, just to say that for us, we feel one of the big advantages is really cross-generational, and you don't have to just be using it with old people. It's something that actually crosses over, and I think, it was talked about in the last presentation as well. I think there are just numerous ways that it can be applied, and I think it's really exciting because there's just so much possibility for it as something to use in general hospitals. And things like watching the turntable is effective as an activity in itself. Just having something that, concentrates you visually can be really effective. And I'm a big fan of the big screens. I moan about the little screens because I like the big screens because I think our patients just really love that sort of big picture. And our biggest impacts have been people calming people down, but also engaging with people who people think are unengageable. So people tried things and said, oh, it's so difficult and they're so impossible. And it's quite often those patients who really respond when they find something that they can make a connection with. And there's so much variety on there. It's often easy to find something that will connect for someone. And we think, it's interesting to see that you guys were talking about it in ITU, and we're now thinking about where we can put it in our more hyperacute units, such as we have a major trauma unit, loads of brain injured patients, and how we can start using it in situations like that, where these people are again all in mostly in single rooms, and terribly, terribly ill, but also very agitated and very restless and very hard to manage. And these sort of things, places where I think we've got a real sort of chance of applying something quite exciting.